Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start talking about plants. This is module 13 of your handbook, and that is starting on page 163. So go ahead and get to that page now. So the standard that we are addressing in this particular module is pretty much looking at how various organisms actually accomplish all of their life functions. So up to this point, we've talked about Stirner, we've talked about synthesis, transport, excretion, all of these different life processes. So now we're going to look at plants and really what's going on with them. So as we start off, are plants the same? Well, all plants share some common characteristics, so they're all photosynthetic autotrophs, meaning that they are using these chloroplasts to go through photosynthesis and to make their own food, their chemical energy from an energy source, which just happens to be sunlight. So they're taking all that, they're making these sugars, they're forming glucose. So all of these plants are going through the same processes in order to get food. All plants are multicellular. They're made of these eukaryotic cells. Remember, eu means yes, so eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus. They have cell walls around the cell membrane, which protects against cell lysis, large vacuoles near the center that actually store water, and chloroplast in their specialized cells within that plant body to go through photosynthesis. So plants are the common producers in ecosystems, and they actually form the base of all terrestrial food webs. So plants are divided into groups actually based on their different characteristics. So overall, they have a lot of the same characteristics, but there are some different ones, and that's how we end up categorizing all of their different species of plants. So the first main division of plants is actually the presence of something called vascular tissue. So vascular tissue is pretty much just consisting of specialized cells, and they're joined into these tubes that actually aid the plant in moving water and nutrients throughout its body, the same way that your veins, arteries, and capillaries move blood, nutrients, and dissolved gases throughout your body. So non-vascular plants actually lack vascular tissue. Vascular plants have two basic types of vascular tissue, and you do need to know this for your EOC. Xylem, which actually carries water, and phloem, which carries nutrients. So vascular plants can further be subdivided by their means of reproduction. So we've kind of categorized plants into these two main categories, vascular and non-vascular. Now we're going to break down vascular into different categories for reproduction. So seedless vascular plants actually reproduce using spores. So if you flip over a fern, and you can kind of see this in the top right picture, they're going to have little spores on the bottom side of their leaves. Gymnosperms, our middle section of pictures, are actually vascular plants which store their seeds in cones. So this is exactly what a pine cone is. When a pine cone falls, all of those seeds are actually put back into the ground. And then angiosperms are vascular plants which store their seeds in fruits which develop from flowers. So angiosperms, I like to think Angie likes flowers, so that's an easy way to kind of remember what an angiosperm is. So are plants alive? Well, yeah, they are, because they follow that Stirner process, all of those characteristics of living things. So transport is describing how the plants get what they need to the cells and actually remove all of the waste from the cells that they don't need. So non-vascular plants actually depend on osmosis. Remember, that's the movement of water and the diffusion of other important substances, so like sugars, to the cells. Therefore, the plants have to be small, and they have to actually grow in mat form. So think about what your rugs look like, your carpeting, and they have a spongy quality which help to absorb and retain water. So when we start thinking about non-vascular plants, we need to think mosses. So if you go out and you start kind of touching around on the base of trees, on maybe fallen logs, all of these are going to feel kind of spongy, kind of matted down. Vascular plants actually have a system of tubes, like we said, xylem that transports water, phloem that transports nutrients. All right, respiration is another part of our Stirner process, and this is pretty much just describing the process by which plants, and all of their cells, of course, transform the stored energy of sugars into the quick energy of ATP. So we're looking at cellular respiration. Do plants go through it? Yeah, they do. So they go through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Then we start talking about excretion. So how do we get rid of all these wastes that are produced within, just normal life processes? So non-vascular and vascular plants actually get rid of excess gases. So going through photosynthesis, going through respiration, we're going to end up with CO2 and oxygen, and actually get rid of it by the process of diffusion. Vascular plants, however, actually have special microscopic openings on the surface of their leaves, and through which that diffusion takes place. These are called stomata. And stomata actually form by two adjacent guard cells kind of coming together. So you can think of it kind of like what your mouth looks like. It opens and closes. It's got a top lip and a bottom lip. Stuff goes in, stuff goes out. Plants can also store waste in their vacuoles or actually in the organs which are destined to fall off or die. So a lot of times waste are stored within plant leaves, which is when they're starting to change colors and they actually end up falling to the ground and dying. Some plants excrete waste products into the soil, occasionally using their waste as chemical weapons against competing plants. So the black walnut actually is toxic to plants, animals, like horses and humans. All right, another part of our Stirninger process is synthesis, and this is pretty much just describing how organisms are building all of their necessary molecules. So plants are producing sugars through photosynthesis. Plants must also produce essential cell molecules such as phospholipids, because remember our cell membranes are made up of phospholipid bilayers, and proteins for the enzymes. Nutrition, so the sugar produced in photosynthesis either has to be stored or moved down throughout the plant to be broken down and used through cellular respiration. So all of this, like I said, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are two very important concepts. They come back to play in many of our different units. Regulation, just pretty much describing how organisms control their body processes. So to regulate is to control. So plants produce hormones which actually regulate their growth and development and actually control responses to stimuli. So auxins are hormones that actually allow for elongation of the cell. So this is leading to increased flexibility and actually allows the plant to bend. Cytokinins are actually hormones that promote rapid cell division, and these hormones are actually found in rapidly growing regions of the plant, such as the plant tissue and root tips and the buds of shoots, and supply energy or supply cells for that plant to actually grow in length. And then ethylene is actually a hormone that promotes food ripening, and because ethylene is actually a gas, it can affect nearby fruit. So if you have a rotting banana in a bowl with a bunch of fresh bananas, those bananas are actually going to rot pretty quickly because that ethylene is being kind of expelled from those other plants. Here's some important concepts to know. A few things are plant tropisms. They're actually plant growth responses to external stimuli. And I think that these are so interesting because plants are actually kind of moving in the way that they need to in order to survive. So phototropism, think of what photo means. So photo means light, actually describes a plant's response to life. So the leaves and stems are actually growing towards the light to help with photosynthesis. So if you put a plant near a window, those leaves are they're actually gonna tend to turn towards the light. And that's why sunflowers are really named sunflowers, is because if you go out to a field, the whole face of the sunflower is really going to be towards the sun. Gravitropism or geotropism actually describes a plant's response to gravity. So the roots are growing down, they're growing towards the force of gravity, but the stems actually grow against the force of gravity, so they're growing up. If you take a planter and turn it on its side, the roots are still going to move down, and you're actually going to see that the stem of the plant will turn upwards. Thigmotropism is just a response to constant contact. So this is why we have vines that wrap around an object, such as the picture below with the mailbox. Reproduction-wise, some plants may also use asexual reproduction through an idea of vegetative propagation, and this is pretty much just when a new plant is produced from an existing vegetative structure. So I gave y'all the example, I guess a while back when we talked about asexual reproduction, that my grandmother gave us all clippings from a Japanese maple, and so we all have the exact same genetically identical Japanese maple in our front yards. Non-vascular plants and seedless vascular plants actually have sperm and egg on separate structures. So the sperm must actually swim to the egg, and this requires a film of moisture. So after fertilization, a structure develops which contains haploid spores. Remember that haploid means half, and the spores actually grow into new plants. The gizmo that you're going to complete today actually looks at the pollination of angiosperms. So angiosperms and gymnosperms actually reproduce by means of seeds. So fertilization in seed plants does not actually require water. Gymnosperms produce pollen in the male cones, which fertilizes the egg in the female cones, and then the fertilized egg becomes a seed. Angiosperms use flowers as reproductive structures. So the colored petals of the flower start to attract these pollinators, these bees, and a flower actually can contain male and female parts. Just a little bit of basic plant anatomy. The male reproductive structure is actually called the stamen, and it consists of the anther and the filament, and then the anther actually produces the pollen, which contains the sperm. The female reproductive structure is called the pistil or carpel, and the pistil consists of the stigma, the style, and the ovary. It's actually sticky, which helps to collect pollen, and the ovary contains ovules, which actually contain the eggs. Pollination occurs when that pollen is transferred by the anther to the stigma. So the pollen actually can be transferred to the stigma of a flower on a different plant, cross-pollination, or to the stigma of a flower on the same plant, self-pollination. So they can actually pollinate themselves, which is pretty cool. And then fertilization occurs, of course, when the pollen reaches and fuses with the egg. So then the fertilized egg becomes a seed. The seed forms, the ovary swells, and actually ripens to form fruit. So the fruit actually aids in seed dispersal. So if we have an apple that falls from a tree, it contains tons and tons of seeds. So when that apple goes into the ground, all of those seeds are now into the ground, which can further reproduce more plants. So they're dispersed in a couple of different ways: by air, like the dandelions, the little flowers that you can blow and make wishes on, that all their seeds float in the wind. By water, so coconuts actually kind of float through the oceans a lot of times since they're found on tropical islands, and hitchhikers, so something like the little gumball in the top right picture. Spore plants actually produce spores, which develop into mature plants. And the seed is actually a very important adaptation for plants who actually live in terrestrial ecosystem because it contains a protective coat. The embryo, which is actually in this kind of arrested state of development, it's kind of in a comatose state, is actually given a relatively large supply of food. Just a little bit more, and my video might cut off, so I'm going to try to splice those two together. So if there's a little jump, that's why. So the leaves are actually the main photosynthetic organisms or organs of a particular plant. So the structure of the leaf is actually adapted for many different functions. So if we look at the cross section of the leaf, you can see all of our different parts of that cross section. The cuticle of a plant is actually the transparent waxy covering that helps protect the leaf from water loss. So through osmosis, we're actually having this cuticle hold all of that water in so that our water is not constantly evaporating or moving out within a saltier environment. And this actually helps to prevent plants such as pines from losing their water during very dry winters, which is why they are called evergreens. The mesophyll layer actually contains cells full of chloroplast, which of course are going through photosynthesis, and this helps to collect carbon dioxide to maximize that rate of photosynthesis. So we talked a little bit more. Here's a little bit more. We'll repeat it again. Xylem is the flow of water, carries water. And then phloem carries nutrients. Stomata is the openings in the cells that are the openings in the leaves that actually allow for that gas exchange. A little bit about specialized leaf adaptation. So the size of the leaf, the amount